A great city separated by the elites which live above and the workers which live below. A place where the benefits of technology have created a virtual paradise on the surface, but those same technologies that produce ease for some mean enslavement for others. Slaves not just to their fellow man on the surface, but slaves literally to the machine to keep the home mechanism, almost organism, running. This is Fritz Lang's 1927 Metropolis. After about 80 years of being separated into different versions of the film, thanks to the discovery in South America around 2008 of a complete copy, such as it was, as much as there was damage, we now have, you can find on YouTube, the full about 2.5-hour version of this 1927 film, Metropolis. This is a classic in so many ways in cinema history, science fiction history. It is very, very difficult to watch. The final complete version does not have there's not a lot of dialogue cards in between frames, and there are no subtitles. Most of the original music is lost, and so in this long version, there's very little snippets of music from those original clips. So it's literally very, very silent. And watching the incredible acting, though seemingly overdramatic from our time, but necessary, watching the interaction of the actors and how they play the roles, you really get a sense of the story. But man, you cannot look away from the screen. It's worse than just reading subtitles. You really have to be focused on what's going on, but it's entirely worth it. Metropolis is so far ahead of its time and groundbreaking in the way the story comes together, in the cinematography, the amazing sort of special effects shots. Just to think of what they were able to pull off almost 100 years ago, it really is something. You almost have to talk about Fritz Lang himself from this time when he and his wife write this story. There's a book put out 2 years before there's a film. He's really the writer, the story guy, the producer, the director. It's sort of an early phase of filmmaking, and he's doing it all. And he has a complicated background. Fritz Lang is an atheist, but he was raised a Roman Catholic. His mother had been born Jewish, but was a convert to Roman Catholicism. Ultimately, this put him at odds with the Nazi Party, and in the 30s, he left for the United States, leaving behind a wife who had become sympathetic with the Nazi Party and its cause. He ends up in Hollywood making movies, trying to make films about lynching and race relations in America at a time when no one did. It's easy to say, well, he clearly is on the political left, as Hollywood always was, even then, but he clearly is not a Marxist. He does not advocate violent revolution. And kind of all of this ends up being important because it gets at the heart of what Metropolis is about. In Metropolis, we get this culture, this civilization heavily divided. The people on the surface are living this whole wonderful lifestyle augmented by all the technologies that the people living below are literally sacrificing their lives in many instances, greasing the gears of this stuff with their very blood, sweat, and tears to make it run. On the other hand, it's very, compare it to H.G. Wells, who supposedly hated this movie, oddly enough. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine does something similar. You might say that Metropolis is almost like a sequel to The Time Machine, in a sense, though H.G. Wells would have hated that because he apparently hated this movie. Because in The Time Machine, of course, in the distant future, the people live above ground in this almost garden paradise thing, but they're occasionally eaten by the Morlocks who come up from under the earth and run the machines. Metropolis could be said to be somewhere in between our time and that time, where that divide has begun to develop, where people are still living this giant cities of Metropolis and all of the technological wonders, but that divide between the people above and the people below is starting to fork off into its various directions. Now, you look at this sort of story, and what really grabs you is that in Metropolis, it doesn't go where you're expecting, based on the history of cinema, or especially what was going on at the time. Like, this is not a movie about communist revolution. The workers are definitely suffering, and there is a lot of violence, but the film is clearly anti-violence. Their attempt to rise up ultimately brings about destruction. They destroy the very machines which are the infrastructure that even keeps them alive and puts their children would have died if not for the intervention of others. And so the message is, violent revolution, you destroy your own culture, you put your own children's future at risk. On the other hand, the people living above, though there's business, we see what is really a cool precursor of an almost digital screen with what looks like a stock ticker, the moving numbers and squiggles that apparently are conveying something. Clearly, these are sort of big business, smart, economically driven people. And yet we don't get any indication that this is a free market system. A communist would look at this film and with their own biases be like, that's where all those rich businessmen live. But there's nothing about the structure of this civilization that makes it remotely like free markets. In fact, there's entirely monopolies. A monopoly, everything on the surface is dominated, and you've got these workers underground. Go back to any point in the history of the Industrial Revolution, no matter how bad workers had it, people in free market systems increasingly understood that your workers are also your consumers. Henry Ford wanted his workers to be able to buy a car, maybe have different types of car, maybe not the most luxurious car, but he wanted them to be able to buy it, because a worker that lives underground, a hand-to-mouth, meager existence, and has no luxuries and no time to do anything but work, has been essentially removed from your economy. They're a drain to the degree that you're paying them, and then you're hoping to profit off what they build. But if you include the worker in the economy so that there are people that are able to consume and able to buy and able to do things and able to have some free time and spend money in that free time, this is what really keeps an economy going. So what we have is a completely poisonous tyranny in Metropolis. It's not really saying, yay capitalism, no capitalism, yay communist revolution, no revolution. It really is driving home this theme continually throughout, that the mediator between the head and the hands has to be the heart. Creating a civilization without spirit ultimately creates a poisonous spirit. And that is part of the spiritual themes and images used throughout Metropolis. The fact that the machine man, female, is backed up by the power. There's a satanic star on the device that powers her. We see the 5-pointed star elsewhere. The Fredder has a vision of the machine, the big heart machine, the main cog in the unit underground. When he sees people die in an explosion where it malfunctions, he has this vision that it is the god Moloch and the people that are being sacrificed to it. And the idea of burning witches. I mean, a lot of weird, almost unexpectedly mystical elements appear in this distant future society. And it drives home that idea that at the core, there's something satanic about a culture that is technological, industrial, but has no spiritual life. Highlighted by the machine woman, who's, of course, the fixture everybody knows from this film, is the incredible use of a robot that, well, is it an android? Is it a cyborg? Made to look like a human female, ultimately in a film, a specific person. You've got, man, how many boxes could Fritz Lang check for the future of science fiction? This is foresight. It's a robot. It's a machine man that could be a laborer, could be a soldier, now takes on human form, could be used for sex. That is implied in the way that people lust after and love this entity. She also symbolically backs up that long-term sort of sci-fi employed paranoia of being replaced by machines. And in this case, for reasons of espionage, replacing someone with a machine. I mean, literally, this checks everything from the Terminator to Short Circuit to Mr. Data on Star Trek. I mean, there's a little bit of everything in this there's a little bit of every one of those themes in this story in Metropolis around the machine, man, woman, female. Lane also strikes upon a thing we see in other science fiction books and universes much later, projecting names into the future, giving people futuristic names, usually by abbreviating current names or slightly tweaking the way that they're spelled. And so we get Joe, I'm assuming it's Joe Fredersen, Joh, no N, like it's John, but it's short. And then Freder, who is Josen, the son of doing this good Scandinavian flip. But then Freder, is he Frederick? Again, they're abbreviated. The inventor's long lost daughter, Hel, which is really interesting because it's like Helga, but it's also like the Scandinavian Hel with one L, which is the region where Hela, the sister of Thor, oversaw the underworld. You know that even from the comic books and the movies, but actually part of the mythology. So more and more of this, you've got this occult imagery buried in there. You've got these futuristic concepts pointed to, and then you've got all of the complexity of the machine person and really how this affects the heart and soul of humanity when the head and the hands are divorced and there's no heart, when everything is spiritually awry. It also reminded me a lot of the historical analysis of Oswald Spengler, great historian who also is kind of the first futurist that I know of. He took analysis from history and contemporary and projected out what he thought was going to happen. And this was a major theme in Oswald Spengler around this same era, before this movie and up to this movie, this same time period. This idea that making technology for the sake of making technology was going to strip us of our humanity. Figuring out how to make it serve us and to create technological things in actual healthful necessity, not just doing it because we can do it, would be the answer to avoiding catastrophe in the future. Metropolis gives us this sort of catastrophe, but it also gives us, interestingly, like no real clear-cut villain. The machine is a product of our own villainy, and the things she does, she's fed to do by our bad impulses, and yet Joe Fredersen is not entirely unredeemable, realizing that his son is caught up in the disaster. He wants to save his son, and he wants this chaos to end. The workers rally around their foreman, who's sort of been the middleman between the underworld and the above world. They kind of rally around him, and they're able to be calmed down after the initial move towards revolution and realizing the damage they've caused. And really by the end, by the time your mediator, the son, Freder, brings together the foreman and the owner of the big company on the surface, his father, by the time they come together, you have people that realize that neither of them represents the good. Like the going either direction is not the answer, that literally in the middle somewhere they have to meet. This is incredible stuff, and can't say it enough, really incredible stuff for a film and for 1927. Ultimately, Lane sets the bar really high for future cinematography. His city, the lighting effects, the elevated highways with the cars, the flying machines, which are clearly meant, they're tweaked in ways to look very futuristic, although they're kind of stuck to the wide wings of planes as he knew them. Only certain technologies, you can't foresee everything, but it's such an incredible panorama of a futuristic city, the incredibly large cast of extras, which is still disputed how many, but does such a good job of capturing a Cecil B. DeMille sort of feel of vast numbers of people, underworld coming up, filling the streets, the rebellion, and setting the bar for science fiction, for special effects, for drama, for telling this story. And it's so long, and yet other than being, as I said, overly silent for our audience of our time, it doesn't have any empty space. Really, you needed all that stuff they cut and more. Some of it that is lost and has to be described because it's just gone. To make real sense of the plot, you needed it all. He was doing this epic between 2 and 3 hour superhero movie before it was ever thought of by us. But he sets the bar then for all of this and the deep philosophy a science fiction philosophy of looking at the future for a purpose, to lead us somewhere or to get us to think about things, think about where we're going and how we're going to get there. What's it going to look like? How to avoid the pitfalls, how to look for the good. It's all really there, and it's incredible stuff. You can find this on YouTube for free. This is where I watched it. I'll see if I can find the link again and put it in the comments. 1927 Metropolis.